Wynde. Written by Tricia Barr. Read by Kristin Serna. Chapter 43. Swear-Off Shuttle FMC SSA 012. The lights had flickered out again. The darkness only made the creaks of straining metal sound that much louder, the howling of the wind more piercing, and the crack of lightning more violent as it lit up the compartment's interior. Gemini caught quick glimpses of the passengers. The lieutenant faced straight forward, motionless despite the vigorous jostling of the others around him. The veteran sergeant major had her eyes shut, but in the picture of pure relaxation, not fear. If Gemini hadn't known better, she'd have thought that 020 was asleep. Each of her new teammates displayed a remarkably calm demeanor, too, until they plummeted 100 meters in a matter of seconds. The red-haired man opened his mouth and half-swallowed a curse. "It's not for losers," Tiish called out. A few others joined in friendly ribbing. Then, the shuttle nosed down abruptly. The engines wailed, everything around them chattering wildly as if it might all break loose. And for a few seconds, eyes widened in a universal feeling they were about to die. The pitch of the engines ebbed slightly. The shuttle rocked, easing slightly starboard and then port. While the shriek of the winds grew deeper and closer, the erratic chaos that had marked their flight lessened, until finally the Swear-Off's path felt more like the determined flight of an arrow on its way to the target. The fury of the wind outside calmed as the shuttle began to level off, and the engines throttled down even faster. They were still descending with considerable speed, just not as steeply, when the compartment lights flickered back on. "We're in the slip," Gemini said breathlessly. She felt a squeeze on her hand and looked over to meet Shrine's violet-eyed gaze. "Oh." "Thank you for helping me brave the storm, Ensign," the diva said, projecting her voice before drawing her hand gracefully away. Gemini didn't recall when they'd taken hands. For all she knew, with flashbacks of her escape from the moon ripping across her mind's eye, she had clutched on to Shrine. The diva tipped her head ever so slightly, then brushed away a stray lock that had wound its way out of her immaculately coiffed hair. "You're welcome." Gemini shifted her gaze across the compartment and caught the relaxing of a slight curl at the left side of the sergeant major's mouth. Before Gemini could fret 100 times over about whether she'd been caught in an act of abject fear or impressed 020, the veteran signaled a quick, subtle thumbs up. The intercom crackled with the co-pilot's voice. "Apologies for the bumpy ride, everyone. Flight T has her days. Dampeners across strait are currently offline, so don't loosen those harnesses yet. We'll have you debark shortly." "That was more than just a bad day for the goddess," Shrine whispered as the shuttle bounced. Turning back to her, Gemini saw the sweeping cliffs of the Antillean caldera out the viewport. "Perhaps it won't hurt to offer her an extra candle this evening." "A show of gratitude." Shrine pondered the suggestion. "I agree. I'll need to know the name of the pilot who appeased the wind's wrath." Gemini's thoughts were still scrambled. A second later, she managed to recall the pilot's name. Yana. Is that a first name? Nope. The file says Yana. Shrine's question was lost in a sharply inhaled breath as the shuttle lurched. Perhaps I spoke too soon. Patting her armrest, she forced her shoulders back down to a more relaxed posture as the soft impact of landing struts vibrated their seats. The diva sighed wearily. "What kind of name is that?" Gemini didn't recognize it as having a particular cultural affiliation, which usually meant the individual hadn't retained a surname from the pre-reconciliation era. Shrugging, she said, "I don't know." "In that case," Shrine declared, releasing her restraints, "let's ask." "I don't think..." The diva was already tapping her knuckles against the cockpit door. But Gemini had to try. "They have shutdown protocols to run." "I'm sure they'll make an exception." Shrine smiled sweetly. When no immediate response came at the door, her nostrils flared slightly. This time, she struck the door more insistently. Rap, 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 rap. The cockpit door opened slightly. The co-pilot's jaw was unmistakable. Is there something I can help you with? The diva stuck her hand through the narrow opening. This is a shrine. I wanted to commend that fantastic flying that brought me safely to the moon. The opening widened just enough for Gemini to catch a glimpse of a man of slightly less than average height, who had a completely foolish look on his face. Miss Shrine. Rolling her eyes, Gemini shoved a palm on the door. Our guest would like to meet the pilot. From inside, another voice, a woman's, sounded more than annoyed. Heel, get rid of them and get back on your checklist. I'm not doing all the work for... As Gemini shouldered her way into the space between the diva and the co-pilot, he stepped back far enough to give her a glimpse of the cockpit. But she already knew who the woman was. Eliana? The pilot shot out of her seat. Brown hair braided intricately and neatly, expertly applied makeup, and an impeccably pressed flight suit, and the brown eyes Gemini had known almost her whole life. And at the same time, her best friend was completely unrecognizable. Yes, the pilot said. Iana, have we met before? Gemini blinked, hoping the disconnect would rectify itself. Standing in front of her was the woman Cultural Minister Fireheart and Master Wynde had always wished their daughter would be. No, Gemini replied. I don't think so. Despite its dramatic descent, the shuttle had landed with its boarding ramp lined up perfectly on the garnet carpet. While Admiral Bernardin and his staff, including Aiko and Ransom, welcomed the diva, the Swerov vented superheated gases and belched periodically as the engine shut down one by one. Badge's hosts, though, were utterly oblivious in the presence of the woman they called Lissa Shrine. They ushered her off to a reception, and trailing them went an eclectic retinue carrying miscellaneous equipment. Badge stayed behind, then slipped into the shadows of the shuttle. He didn't have to wait long before a slight young woman in a flight suit scurried down the ramp. Pausing at the bottom, she tried to glance left and right to check her surroundings, then huffed in exasperation at the limitations of the tight Atmo collar she was still wearing. She reached up, peeling the collar over her head. Her attempts to get it past carefully plaited hair without creating a mess were unsuccessful. Shig, she muttered, quickly tucking a stray lock behind her ear before resuming her inspection of the hangar. Figuring a decent pilot would catch sight of him in her peripheral vision, Badge stepped forward. Casually, he offered, Well done. Thanks. Without uttering another word, she turned on her heel and strode purposefully towards the aft of the shuttle. Badge went after her, his longer legs allowing him to catch her quickly. You've flown the current before. My record speaks for itself. Stopping where the engine housing curved closest to the ground, she stretched up on her toes to peer upward. You know where I could get a service ladder around here? Unfortunately, no. It's my first time on the Soku. Mine too. She put 2 fingers to her lips and unleashed a shrill, ear-piercing whistle. Every crew in the hangar, all working in some form or another to return the area to a productive space, stopped what they were doing. In a voice that easily carried across the hangar, she called out, Can someone get me a ladder over here, please? The nearest crewer said, Swear off, qualified mechs will have to be summoned from another fleet ship. That doesn't solve my immediate problem, which is, I need a ladder. Petty officer. She added that last part as an afterthought, but seemed satisfied when the crewer saluted and shuffled off. Apparently not one to stand idle waiting, she continued a visual inspection of the lower engine housing. Did you want something? As a matter of fact, yes. Make it quick. Not planning on staying long. You're not attending the reception? Didn't bring my party clothes. She waved at someone behind Badge. Over here! The ladder clacked along the seams of the hangar floor. She met his scrutinizing gaze. Your time's running up, Badge. Before he could say anything, she jogged up the steep rungs. Chasing her up would only give the impression of desperation, so Badge stayed where he was. I didn't get your... She paused her ascent, but didn't look back. Iana. Your first name. It's not important. Her footsteps clanked the last few rungs, and after crossing the platform at the top, she disappeared from sight. Determination overcoming restraint, he clambered up after her. It is if I'm going to be able to request your transfer to the blade training unit. She knelt by a hatch atop the shuttle, her hand gripping the release. You want to train me in a blade? Yes, I think you're well suited. Thanks for the compliment. The corner of her mouth curled slightly, right before she lowered her face and opened the hatch. A typical pilot mentality, which he knew this woman possessed at an instinctual level, ought to have compelled her to jump at the opportunity. So, Badge waited for it to sink in. After half a minute, though, she still seemed interested only in poking around the shuttle's innards. Then, she spat. Nerf it all to hells! How bad is it? They don't call them first in the hangar for nothing. It took him a second to make the connection. Swearov was a division of 5th. The blades are Wynde Industries. What? They're gonna retrofit AB-22s for the fleet? Not airblades. Space blades. Just like that, the hatch was forgotten. Space blades? Yes, I'm training a core group of elite pilots to fly escorts, make in-system runs, and fight the Orkans when they come. Unlike many Premians he had met, something in her tone made him believe she understood that a fight would be inevitable. Now Badge was even more certain he needed to recruit her. That, too? What group are you with? For the first time she was studying his rank insignia, his uniform. Everything about him. My specialty is training pilots in single-man fighters. Space combat? Before he could catch himself, he said, The only kind that matters. Surprisingly, she didn't react. I don't recognize the uniform. You from one of the guards? I'm from the Protectorate. She looked away, thinking. I know a lot about the government, but I've never heard of the Protectorate. That was odd. After the assassination of the Orkan ambassador on Prime, the fleet had been cooperating fully in the recruitment, even briefing individual squadrons in an attempt to attract the best possible pilots. They'd kept it under wraps from the media, at least so far, but most of the military pilots had to know by now. You're not active duty in the fleet? Just a shuttle test pilot, sorry. I only flew this run last minute. I'm not even supposed to be here. She stiffened, her focus shifting inward. Speaking of which, I'd better get this heap of shiny bolts in working order so I can get back to where I am supposed to be. She turned her back to Badge, summarily dismissing him. For whatever reason, she wasn't leaping at his offer. He needed pilots who were hungry. Still, maybe he could whet her appetite. Retrieving an ident card from his pocket, he placed it on the flat of the ladder's safety rail. In case the situation changes for you. With any luck, I'll be working with the fleet for a while. Poking around inside the hatch, she barely glanced at where the ident card rested. Thanks. For the card? For the safe. I couldn't have done it without you. He hesitated, wishing he knew her first name. He would have used it. Actually, I think you could have. But I'm glad if I helped.